Hello, welcome back. This is the second video with Miss Harvey for the Rebecca extract looking at paper 1 from Language AQA. Hopefully you've already done question 1. That video includes me reading through the extract as well as you answering question 1. It's important that you answer the reading questions in order, so 1, 2, 3, 4, because each of the questions build on their skills. So make sure you've done that video and then come back to this video to do question 2 with me this morning. Or today, or afternoon. I'm recording this morning, but actually you might be in a different part of the day. Hello if it's midnight. You shouldn't be working at midnight. Okay, right, stop me rambling. Let's get on with question 2. So, hopefully you have your extract there with you. It's the exactly the same one. Exactly the same one as I used last time. In fact, look, there's my answer to question 1 underneath. Let's have a look at question 2, shall we? So look in detail at this extract from lines 5 to 16. So I'm going to stop myself there. I'm going to grab my highlighter, lines 5 to 16. Let's make sure we're really clear where those are. 5 to 16. So no surprises there. It's the next paragraph. Down, oh, let me get that on camera. Down, it's this next big chunk. So the first thing I'm going to do is finish reading the questions, and then I'm going to reread the paragraph to make sure I'm reminded of what it says. How does the writer use language here to describe the driveway and front garden? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. Remembering, this is a language analysis question. And language analysis, to make it a language term, it's got to be a sentence or smaller. Remember that, because when we come on to question 3, our structural features question, this actually links into it. So language is a sentence or smaller. So although they call it sentence forms, you might sometimes call it with your teacher's sentence structure. And so that feels like it should be in question 3. It's not. It can actually sit in question 2, sentence structure, because if it's a sentence or smaller, it's a language feature. Now this question is worth 8 marks. It's always worth 8 marks. Okay, so you should take slightly longer on it. Okay, you'll be looking at probably around 10 minutes to answer this question. And when we go and read the paragraph in a moment, we're looking for things that describe the driveway and the front garden. Now, we all remember from reading the extract, it's quite a lot about the driveway and the front garden. So that's also a bit of a relief, because that means we'll have lots to work with. We've already answered things about Rebecca. So no more can we answer things about Rebecca in this question. That's not what the question's asking. We also can't use lines 1 to 4. So any of the things that we've already come across are used in question 1, we can't use again now. But again, that shouldn't be a problem. It's a nice meaty paragraph. So I'm just going to read through it again and we'll go from there. What we might want to do potentially, actually, as I read through, like I would be in an examination, is I'm going to be highlighting any literary devices or particular words and phrases that actually jump out to me as I'm reading. No smoke came from the chimney, and the little lattice windows gaped forlorn. I'm going to gaped forlorn because that, for me, windows can't be sad. Therefore, that must be personification. Okay. Then, like all dreamers, I was possessed of a sudden supernatural powers. Possessed, supernatural powers, and passed like a spirit through the barrier before me. Now here we've got a semantic field emerging. We may end up adding to it, but a semantic field, remember, is a series of words that all link to the same theme. So you can't have a semantic field on its own. It has to be of something. So this is a semantic field of, and I'm actually going to go with supernatural. Now I know it says the word supernatural in there, but that is kind of what we're going for here. Supernatural or fantasy, you might want to call it. Because we've got this idea of being possessed. That's a ghostly thing, almost horror-esque actually. And then you've got supernatural powers, okay, which kind of, to me, makes me think of witches. It might also make you think of Avengers, like there's a bit of a both going on there. And then spirit is obviously a synonym for ghost. Okay, so we're back to that idea of kind of like this horror, supernatural idea going on. And we'll see where it goes with it. So passed like a spirit through the barrier before me. The drive wound away in front of me, twisting and turning as it had always done. There you've got some alliteration, haven't you? Twisting and turning. I'm going to go up. Okay. But as I advanced, I was aware of the change that had come upon it. Have I read that right? Sorry. Aware that a change had come upon it. No, I didn't. It was narrow and unkempt, not the driveway that we had known. At first, I was puzzled. I did not understand. And it was only when I bent my head to avoid the low swinging branch of a tree that I realised what had happened. Okay, so I'm going to highlight narrow and unkempt. Okay, the word, they're both adjectives for starters. Okay, so they're both adjectives. I'm not entirely sure how they're going to meet in with potentially what I might want to say, but it's useful to note them for now. So where were we here? I realised what had happened. Nature had come into her own again. Now there we've got a little bit more personification. Now when we talk about nature being personified, I'm hoping we all kind of think of the same thing here. So I'm thinking of Mother Nature. So I might want to write that down. Mother Nature. Oh, Mother Nature should have a capital, of course. Oh, and you can't see any of this. Mother Nature should have a capital, of course, because it's a proper noun. Mother Nature. And little by little, in her stealthy, insidious way, had encroached upon the long drive with long, tenacious fingers. Now, we stopped and talked about these words when we were looking at it in the first video. Stealthy, insidious, encroached, okay? They're all very negative words. So you've got this idea of Mother Nature, but then you pair her, that personification, with these two adjectives and this verb. Ooh, getting a bit messy now. It's absolutely fine though. And then link it to Mother Nature. It's very negative. Suddenly Mother Nature doesn't seem like this loving woman anymore, that normal way of seeing her. It's been subverted, changed somehow, which actually is quite, to me as the reader, is quite unsettling, because I always see Mother Nature as this, you know, you see her in pictures like blooming and looking wonderful and flowers in her hair and nurturing, because you've obviously got the word mother, which is meant to be lovely and loving, and nature, happy and everything growing and blooming, and now you've got her being stealthy and insidious and encroaching. Not great. And also this kind of long tenacious fingers as well kind of gives her this kind of witchy feel, which isn't particularly very nice either. The woods, always a menace even in the past, had triumphed in the end. Now, menace, something bad, okay, and triumphed, this verb here is particularly interesting, okay. Triumphed means to win, so something's won. So that kind of gives me the idea as a battle between kind of like the idea of the driveway and nature. So the driveway, which is humans, so the driveway represents the humans, and nature has won, which is quite a scary idea potentially as well, the idea that they're kind of fighting to take control. They crowded, so more personification, dark and uncontrolled. Again, we've got this idea that kind of links into me with my semantic field over here of, oh, sorry, knocking the camera. I promise I won't give up the day job when we go back. So you've got this semantic field of fantasy and supernatural and dark and uncontrolled. You think of all the beasts and ghouls you get in fantasy supernatural stuff, that they're definitely uncontrolled. Lots of that stuff happens at night. Okay, so definitely, and then you've got the personification of the crowded. So I'm just going to link it back down to that personification there. To the borders of the drive. The beeches with white, naked limbs leant closer to one another, their branches intermingled in a strange embrace, making a vault above my head like an archway of a church. Now, this is interesting. Okay, there's a few different things going on here. So the beeches are white, but naked. So quite often the connotations of white kind of give you that kind of purity. And when you think of beaches, they often are described as silvery and white, which is quite pure and quite beautiful way. But then you link them with naked, and to me, this makes me think of dead bodies. You may disagree with me, you may be thinking, what's wrong with Miss? But that kind of idea of that kind of pale body, no blood going through it, being naked, being weak, being unable to be covered. You are on the back foot, so to speak, if you're out and about like these trees are and white and naked. We think of the kind of beach body to be slightly tanned. Normally when we talk about nakedness, we talk about paleness as well. We don't talk about whiteness, which is why I'm going along those lines of something not quite living linked to this. But they're trees, they are alive. And actually to be naked is quite personified again. So there is definitely some negative undertones going through there. And then obviously limbs is very personified as well, because, dropping my highlighter, limbs are something that humans have or animals have. And here we're giving the tree trunks as their limb and their branches as their many limbs. And that feels unnatural, I think would probably be the best way of putting it. Lent close to one another, their branches intermingled in a strange embrace. Now, I'd go as far as potentially calling strange embrace an oxymoron. The reason being is that obviously an embrace is a hug, it's something very loving, whereas strange does not fit into that loving kind of theme and idea. So I think that these two sit at opposites with each other. So this idea that they're in a strange embrace, they're intermingled kind of all together in this strange embrace, is again this kind of unsettling feeling that's running through the language being used in this part of the extract. Then you've got making a vault above my head like the archway of a church. Now, if I'm perfectly honest, I'm not entirely sure what Maurier was trying to do here, but just because I don't know doesn't mean I can't try and analyse, and I am a reader in myself, so I can potentially come up with some ideas as to what this potentially might mean. Now, the archway of a church is obviously, an archway is somewhere that you walk into. It's the opening part of, and churches are often quite quiet and empty spaces, assuming that there's no service going on. And I kind of get this feeling that she's walking into somewhere that's potentially quite open yet empty. There's also this connotation of hallowed ground, this idea of where she's walking is somewhere that means something to her, just like a church is hallowed ground, is important, somewhere that means something to people. And she's walking into this driveway where the branches have met above her head and created this tunnel. So she's walking into somewhere that holds that kind of ethos and atmosphere that kind of she can feel. That is kind of true when you walk into a church. You've also got that idea that churches quite often, particularly in the time that this extract was written, were made of stone. So there's something quite imposing about a church as well. They're quite cold, they're quite echoey, they're quite empty places. And actually you could even go as far as linking it to our semantic field if you explained it well enough. Churches have a lot of links to being sacred sanctuaries against the supernatural. So this idea that she's already talked about there being lots of supernatural-esque elements within the church-like woods and drive that she's walking into kind of implies that maybe it's quite an ungodly place because the church has fallen to the supernatural elements that she's already spoken about. So that would be quite interesting to look at there, to the comparisons. And so basically what I'm talking about there's no specific literary device, but it's the connotations that I've talked through there, which are potentially important here. And we're nearly there. And there were other trees as well, trees that I did not recognise, squat oaks and tortured elms that straggled cheek by jowl with the beeches. So again, we've got straggled cheek by jowl, so The cheek is the fleshy upper bit of your face. The jowl is the kind of, hopefully not many of us have it, but the bit of fat that kind of drops down from your chin. Dogs have them more often than humans do, but that kind of bit, that kind of idea that they're all kind of intermingled so close, they're almost one part of their face. And then of course, by talking of cheeks and jowls, it's talking about the face. Giving plants faces is unusual, uncomfortable. It's that personification in a negative way again. You've got the two adjectives, squat, meaning sort of down low, trying to keep out of the way, and tortured, which I'm hoping I don't need to explain the connotations of that word to you. And again, it's describing the trees in this way. And oak trees are meant to be vast, huge, mighty symbols of the British countryside. And here we're describing it as small and low. It doesn't want to be seen. It doesn't want to be taken note of, which is the antithesis, the opposite of what it normally is. Tortured elms. This idea that the tree has been tortured and hurt and kind of moved in ways that doesn't feel natural by the other things around it, the other branches that are potentially growing near it. And then obviously all of these trees, oaks and elms and beeches, are all trees that are very natural to the British countryside. They're things that we applaud and we enjoy seeing and are easy to spot. And here they are described in a very negative way. It should be a forest full of oaks and elms and beeches should be a nice place to go for a walk, yet we don't feel that Rebecca should be walking here. It doesn't feel right due to the adjectives that's being used to describe it, and this metaphor of the cheek by jowl. And had thrust themselves out of the quiet earth along with monster shrubs and plants, none of which I remembered. Okay, verb thrust, very violent verb, and monster, shrubs, interesting adjective again. Monster clearly links to our semantic field of supernatural there, and thrust is a violent verb. And again, that doesn't match with a nice afternoon stroll through the woods that we should be getting here. So there are tons of things that we could potentially be talking about in there, some of which you may have spotted, some of which you may have not. If you wanted to take the time now to stop and go away and write your answer before I explain how I would suggest you write an answer, please do take the time to stop the video now. If you'd like to continue with me, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to talk about how I suggest you answer a question 2. Now that we've done all of this kind of annotating. Obviously in the exam you don't have as long to talk through and work through as I've just done, but I think it's really important that you can stop and look at that kind of paragraph and see how much there is in there. In a very short space you have tons of things that you could be talking about. And at the very least, we've identified some word forms, interesting verb use and interesting adjective use in this piece, alliteration, personification, and then some higher level things going along the idea, terminology, going along the idea of the connotations and the semantic fields that potentially come with this piece of writing. Okay, so question 2. When I teach this, I'm going to teach you this in 2 ways. A way that I teach it that if you're used to being in my lessons you will have seen before, and also another way that sometimes is a little bit more helpful to take you and break you out of those Pisa, structures that you might have learned otherwise. So I often teach my students PILA. Okay, let me focus that for you. So PILA stands for point, evidence, language device, and then analysis. Okay, now the other way of looking at this is looking at the what, the how, and the why. Now your what is these 2 bits together, and then your how and your why. It's essentially the same kind of query, and your teachers may have taught it to you differently, and I'm going to use the both of them as I talk it through today. Your point, or your what, is how are you going to answer that question. So if we look back at our question, How does the writer use language here to describe the driveway and the front garden? Okay, well, I think we could probably come up with some really interesting adjectives here to describe the garden. So if you were asked just to describe the garden, you might think of a few different ways of answering that. So I would come up with, I'm thinking that it's actually quite a mysterious place. It's mysterious. It's quite scary. Okay. It's evil. You could even describe it as dangerous, potentially. It's dangerous. I would need to now link with my what, or my second point, which is my evidence, quotations to each of those points to prove that. Now you'll notice that these points I would develop into paragraphs. Completely separate paragraphs where I answer and keep my point, my what, incredibly clear. Because in each of these paragraphs, I'm going to go through a point, an evidence, a language device, and an analysis, or what, how, and why for each one. So I'm saying, what is the garden? It's mysterious. And I know it's mysterious when it says, I want to go with possessed of a sudden with supernatural move it across. Oh, that's stuck on my table. Powers. Okay. And obviously that would link to my language device. There would be a semantic field of, you can't have to say of something, remember, supernatural or fantasy. Okay, and that's obviously one element. So I talk about the verb possessed, and then supernatural powers, the noun there, but also probably potentially want to quote spirit later on, which is obviously in there that we've noted, and we also noted monster, which are the other clear ones. Okay, which would be useful to know. Okay, scary, something that shows that it's scary in there. Potentially, I'd go with, I'm going to come back to scary because I think that's probably, if I'm perfectly honest, I only need to give 3 paragraphs here, and I think evil and dangerous are better vocabulary than scary. Scary can be a bit basic. So I'm going to see what I can come up with evil and dangerous, and I'm going to come back to scary and see if it's worth it. Evil, I think, is I need to use some personification here. Mother Nature had come into her own. Also, nature had come into her own. And obviously that's personification. That's nice and simple. We were spotting that throughout, and we know there's other versions of personification. Okay, and then dangerous, I'm going to go with the dangerous part of it. I'm going to go with the squat oaks and tortured elms, because I'm going to talk about the fact that we've already spoken about the fact that they are really important British trees, that we have connotations of them being the exact opposite of how this quote portrays them, and I think that that's really interesting to talk about. And so although I'm only talking about adjectives there, that is still a way of getting a really high mark at GCSE. I have given out very high marks for answers to this question at GCSE marking in the summer when I've had students zoom in on word forms, and I think that's really important as well. So here we're talking about the adjectives, particularly as we know already that we're going to be talking about semantic fields and personification. We can definitely get in there some word forms. And then scary. I mean, we had that archway of a church, whether I could potentially call that scary. I'm going to change scary, because actually I don't think that word's particularly very good. I'm going to go with unnatural. Now, obviously, an obvious one would be to talk about the personification of nature being unnatural. But it's not unnatural. Mother Nature, as we all discussed about, is personifying her is an incredibly natural thing for writers to do. So I'm going to go with unnatural, and I'm going to use that archway of a church, like the archway of a church. Which of course I didn't say earlier, and hopefully you all screaming at the video, is obviously a simile. But also talk about the connotations that potentially link from it. So I'm not actually going to give you all of the answers here for all of these. I'm going to go with one of them and talk you through the answer. And therefore, you are welcome to stop the video now and have a go at answering each of those in a pillar structure, or you can wait with me and see how I set out one answer paragraph and then go away and do a couple more of your own, either based on my ideas or based on things you've already seen. So pause the video now if you want to do that. If not, let's stick together here. So I'm going to go with my point, my evidence, and then I'm going to expand the paragraph as I go down. But obviously we've already discussed that this is my what. Okay, nice and clear, this is my what. So I'm going to choose the dangerous one at the bottom. I'm going to go with the adjective form to show you that you can do word forms well, okay, and give you guys all a bit of a challenge to go with the slightly higher level terminology to explain it in there. But my point is just going to be linked to the question. So if the question is, how does the writer use language to describe the driveway and the front garden? I need to answer that question, don't I? So the writer describes the driveway as dangerous. Nice and simple. Okay. Now I need to obviously put in a quotation. I need to embed that slightly. So this danger is clear to the reader as the writer describes the trees as squat oaks and tortured. I'm just going to jump down a line because I'm struggling to write on the camera. And tortured elms. Obviously you'd write to the end of the page. You know how annoyed I get when people don't do that, wasting paper. But I've got a reason today. Mainly because my makeshift rig that I've made to film this off is unfortunately in the way of my arm when I write too far down. So that's partly why. But here we've got it really interestingly, haven't we? So the writer describes the driveway as dangerous. That's my word there. Tick. Okay. My evidence. This danger is clear to the reader as the writer describes the trees as squat oaks and tortured elms. Obviously I need to finish off my quotation marks there. Okay. You'll see that I've embedded that. The quotation kind of builds itself into the sentence that I've made. It doesn't say, I know this when the writer says squat oaks and tortured elms. Firstly, the writer doesn't say anything. You're reading it. The writer's writing it. So the writer says they don't say anything. They write, if anything. But actually, it just makes your writing look a little bit nicer if you can try and build it into a sentence. It makes it flow a little bit nicer for the examiner to read. Now, the next thing I need to do is I need to make sure that it's really clear that I'm using language terminology. Okay, remembering that the question asks me specifically to include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques and sentence forms. Now, I'm including a word here, aren't I, which is a word form. So I need to say here, the writer uses. Now, I could just write adjectives. I could just write here the writer uses adjectives. I always think, actually, when you're using a word form in an answer for an analysis question, or whenever you're analysing language, you need to include an adjective to describe the verb form. So actually, hilariously, we're using an adjective to describe the adjectives here. Now, we've already talked about squat, although it's not squats oaks, it's squat oaks. We've talked about the fact that squat oak and a tortured elm is unusual. Therefore, the adjectives are unusual. Those nouns, those trees described in that way is unusual. Therefore, what's making them unusual is the adjectives. So we can say here the writer uses unusual adjectives. And that's my language device bit done. Okay. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean I need to have an end of a sentence here, but obviously I'm going to drop down because that's my how. And now we need to do our why. Okay, our analysis of effect on the reader. Why has the author chosen to use that specific technique and how does it show? So why does, not how, sorry, we were doing the how. Why does it show that the driveway is dangerous? How do those unusual adjectives show that the driveway is dangerous? Okay, so the writer uses unusual adjectives. These unusual adjectives show how dangerous the drive is, or the driveway is, because oaks are normally described as strong, wise, and quite powerful actually, and powerful symbols. But here, the adjective squat portrays them as cowardly and small, almost as if they are, let's put more on the page, almost as if they are hiding away is where I'm going to go with this. Equally, describing elms as tortured. It was tortured, wasn't it? I'm now looking back on my quotation. Yes, it is. Tortured. Again, implies these normally majestic trees having a slight stop there, majestic. There we go. Majestic trees are being overpowered and hurt. This implies danger as clearly something very scary and powerful would have to be able to do this. To them, and that Rebecca a human would stand no chance against them. Okay, let's read that entire paragraph through again and just check it all through. So the writer describes the driveway as dangerous. This danger is clear to the reader as the writer describes the trees as squat oaks and tortured elms. Here the writer uses unusual adjectives. These unusual adjectives show how dangerous the driveway is because oaks are normally described as strong, wise and powerful symbols. But here the adjective squat portrays them as cowardly and small, almost as if they are hiding away. Equally, describing elms as tortured again implies these normally majestic trees are being overpowered and hurt. This implies danger as clearly something very scary and, oh my God, powerful. I've done it again. Powerful would have to be doing this to them, and that Rebecca, a human, would stand no chance against them. Something about this driveway is dangerous. Okay, so can you see how right at the beginning I've got my point, which is answering the question, and I've given my evidence, my quotation to prove it, my what. My how is the writer doing this? Well, the writer's doing this by using adjectives, unusual adjectives. Why does the unusual adjective use here show the driveway is dangerous? Well, I'm going to explain that because the unusual adjectives, oaks are normally described like this, but here they're being described as this. That's unusual. The elms are normally described as this, but here they're being described as this. That's unusual. And that shows danger because obviously something very scary and powerful was able to do that to kind of subvert that normal way of thinking, and that Rebecca as a human would stand no chance against them. Therefore, something about the driveway is dangerous. Okay, what I would like you to do now is I'd like you to pause the video, well, not pause the video, end the video, I'm ending the video here. Go back away and have a look at the extract yourself. See if you can write some more paragraphs in that way, either using Peeler or what, how, why. Those are the other ones I came up with, which was the mysterious, possessed of a sudden supernatural power, unnatural, like the archway of a church. That's quite a high level answer if you go into the connotations of that, like we talked through at the beginning. And evil, nature had come into her own, the personification there. Or equally, there might be something else that you spotted that you want to go back and do. Tune in for the next video where I'll be looking at question 3 with this extract. Well done. Thank you.